Hey everyone, welcome to Super Excited. And I'm super excited to be here today with Henry Love. Henry Love's from Fundamental Labs. We got to know each other through Truflation nearly 4 or 5 months ago, and really excited to be working with him at Truflation. Henry, great to see you and great to connect. It'd be great. Maybe Henry, give the audience a bit of background on yourself. You've been in crypto for quite a while, right? Been working with a lot of OGs, and I think super interesting background.
Thank you, Stefan. Really,
Yeah,
really, really excited to be here. I think we might have met first time. I don't know where, Hong Kong or Japan, or I
yeah,
might have been the Tokyo conference in 2017, 2018,
yeah.
I think.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
When we talked about that, that was the first time we
yeah,
met. My journey in crypto kind of really accelerated after leaving Facebook in 2017, late 2017, around September.
yeah,
And I was very fortunate, in my life that I speak native Chinese and Japanese. And during that run of 2017, 2018, and, all focus was on Japan, right?
yeah,
Japan
yeah.
was
The hub.
legalizing crypto, was the hub, and everyone's going to Tokyo. And then China was obviously a huge mining hub, and with Bitcoin leading the pack and everything, and with all the basically the fastest, the best miners coming out of China, with Bitmain
Yeah,
being the biggest,
Jihan.
800-pound gorilla. So my languages became very useful. And my background from Facebook was working with startup founders and advising them. So when it comes to time that I was interested in the world of crypto, and I met in the crypto group in Austin. One of the investors, David Johnston, who started the Bit Angels in 2012, and then the
Yeah,
DApps Fund in 2014, was one of the first investors in the space. And really, really early on, got to know every founder and everyone that's trying to innovate on
yeah.
Bitcoin network. And I was basically approached to be his right hand. So
Yeah.
I took on the chief investment officer position for his family office, and was the first hire there. And little did I know, and the next thing I know, I'm in Tokyo and speaking with you and Roger Ver at the time, and
Yeah.
he was a huge activist. and
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, Satoshi Roundtable, where all the founders were
Coming
meeting
together.
together, coming together once a year. So all those things uh, um, accelerated my learning curve.
Right.
And so I basically got a download of like what happened from 2012, and how Vitalik and David went to China and talked to
Yeah, I
the
remember that.
Wanshan
Yeah,
Group,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the
yeah,
launch of Fimbushi Capital, and
yeah.
and how Ethereum almost ran out of money out of the foundation, which no one talks about anymore. So
Yeah.
all these interesting stories, that was like, wow, like I have a very unique insights in this industry, because it's just a ton of information arbitrage at the time, and
At that
none of
time.
that was public.
Yeah.
I've all of a sudden people have started to realize that, like, hey, Henry has unique access to these information, so we want to invite him to come speak. So
Yeah.
did the whole speaking tour between 2018, 2019, and then we went down kind of a detour of an enterprise blockchain. And
Yeah.
we thought that we can bring a lot of enterprise
Definitely.
transaction to blockchain and increase the value of these layer one protocols, including Bitcoin, Ethereum. And that's where I met David Post, and who now works at Chainlink,
Chainlink Lab. Yeah.
as a managing director there. And yeah, and from there, I met the folks at Fundamental Labs along the way,
Yeah.
and they're a fund that started in 2016. They've done really well. They've been really quiet because a lot of it is proprietary capital, and they've invested huge into mining. They've acquired a Hong Kong trust. Now we have a full blown asset management platform that's partnered with Coinbase, that's partnered
Yeah.
with Terra, a number of different platforms. So So I run the Americas, North and South America for Fundamental Labs as a partner. We're one of four. I'm one of four now, so we have four partners, and we're growing the team from 10 to 30. And we're on to our Fund 6. So
Wow.
super excited. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's kind of crazy to say that we're on Fund 6
Fun
because most
six.
other funds are Fund 2, maybe
Uh,
Fund 2, maybe Fund 3, and we just have looked at it since for a long time ago, since 2016. So excited to have a full team, all the resources to support a project like yours, like Truflation, to move forward and democratize information and democratize decentralized power.
And so, one of the things that I find really interesting about your background, and what I've said to David as well, is that you a sort of what I feel is really a new breed of venture capital. You have operational experience, you have product management experience, and you're a part of a bigger operational facility and driving venture. So you have more of a strategic perspective, right? And if you look at your career, sort of to date, you've gone through all of these different phases, and crypto has evolved significantly over these years, right? How do you see that
Mm-hmm.
evolution, right? I mean, we started off in 2017, we went into the big bubble, big crash,
Yeah.
2018, 19, the dark
Mm-hmm.
winter, and then COVID even brought us even down further, right? And then, so how do you feel it's evolved, and what would you say, from the days of 2017 are markedly different today in crypto land?
It's a great question. I think I'll cover it in few words, right? And I think the first word that I would choose for the difference between 2017, 2018, and now is just so much more complicated. It's
Yeah.
and at the time, we were thinking about this, one token, and what does that token represent? The supply and demand of the token. How does that work, and how does that interact with the community, with investors, with all the stakeholders, right? Um, and today, and we look at some of these newer projects and are doing really innovative things, and some are really really cool, but super complex because they have one token and another token that interact with each other, and then you add the NFTs, that are part of it that can earn tokens, and all of a sudden you have these like three different properties within one project, and it's just the economics between these variables that are created by the founders, and a lot of times there's no precedent, right?
Yeah.
There's just big experiment, and we're
Big
tweaking
experiment.
one thing, and tweaking one thing, and that affects the other thing, and how do we maintain all these things all together, moving forward, right? And those are the conversations that we're having today in 2022, than 2017. In 2017, it was more like who's real, who has track record, and who's not going to run away with money and
With the
create this
money,
virtual
exactly.
token, right?
Yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
it's a different world now, I think.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
also, the world's of set of tools and the
Hmm.
diversity of and the innovation, the speed of innovation is much quicker today. The talent coming into the market with the tools that are available is also much more mature, which is really exciting to see. And the innovation is continuing to keep going at such a velocity, which is exciting.
Totally.
Yeah, I
And with
mean,
the animation, I think, yeah, as you mentioned, like the as an investors, we had to
yeah,
change, right? We had to move
exactly.
forward, and that landscape has changed a lot as well because um, these projects are doing things much more complicated than before. So we need to learn ourselves to stay up to date about information that don't exist anywhere else. We have to do our own research and kind of dream a little bit about the future,
Yeah,
what that
yeah,
could look
yeah.
like, right? And instead of kind of looking at other examples and say, hey, like this looks like that, so this is going to be successful, but there's nothing like that within our industry. So our research component, our own kind of self learning, and really giving ideas and supporting founders, in a different way than maybe traditional VCs are, investing in 1,000 companies or hundreds of companies and then hoping for, one of them is going to pop and return the fund. For us as a operation, we're
Yeah.
where fund is one of three aspects of, we have asset management, we have an infrastructure business, and we have a fund. And with that, um, every investment that we make, we look at it from a not only from a return standpoint, but from a significance in the industry, right?
Yeah.
From what this project will look like 10 years from now. How could this really transform the
Yeah.
world that we live in today? And that requires founders and projects that are super open-minded and innovative, and
Yeah.
and dream big. And I
Yeah.
think that's something that, maybe after the DeFi summer in 2020,
In
and
2020.
there's yeah, and then there are a lot of projects kind of are doing somewhat of a copycat, and copy each other because it's all open source. And it's for us, we're truly looking at it, projects that are world changing, that are first to market in some ways, and that look at it differently, and that's super exciting for us because we know that the next DeFi summer or the NFT boom or whatever, as investors, we want to look ahead, and we can't
Yeah.
follow the kind of the what's happening today, the trend today.
Yeah, you want to be setting the trend, being ahead of the trend versus trailing the trend, right? And I think
Absolutely, yeah.
one of the things is we launched Truflation and was super excited about that, and I think we
Hmm.
viewed it very much as an experiment when we first launched. Right? Is this really something?
Yeah.
Can we build a real business? And when I met you, and when we had a great connection, and we saw and the vision of what this could be potentially and where this
Hmm.
potentially could go. Although the path's not set, we don't know that yet, but we know that we can curve that path and create a whole new system instead of trying to change the existing legacy systems, which is really hard to do. There's so many entrenched processes, resources that are locked in and tied into that entrenchment. How do you build a new system and an alternative that people then can choose to, right? And how do you, in your role, identify those new experiment fields, right? You see so many good deals and you do lots of good investments. And really, every time I talk to you, you're always telling me about a new cool project that you've invested in, which and is really exciting, right? So you must see lots of new experiments. And how do you make
Hmm.
that decision to be, this is going to be a trend and this is going to be something we want to take a stronger foot in, a position in?
And I think that's the favorite part about my job. I think
Yeah,
um, I get to dream more than, and I think other professions, and even the founders. Sometimes I get to dream about the future, and I'm sometimes telling the founders like what their project could be, right?
yeah,
Because sometimes the founders and people who are running the operations, if you're an operator, right, like you can see maybe 6 months or 1 year, maybe 2 3 years from now, right? But
yeah.
as an investor, for us, we're looking at 5 years, 10 years down the line.
Oops.
And I forgot which investor, or it might have been Steve Jobs or someone famous that had a quote talking about how you want to visualize the future and then build what's missing, right?
Yeah,
So you first have to kind of look ahead and say, well, with all the tools that are available today, what could be possible 5 10 years from now? How information will be flowing and how data could be flowing, and how people will be using these products and services, and what would the world look like in 10 years. And from there, and we can derive kind of the you can see a kind of glimpse of it, maybe a super fine line of how potentially we could get there. And there are multiple lines, right? There's
yeah,
like billions of lines that could get to that future. We'll get to a
yeah,
different future, right? But at
yeah,
least you can see a few lines that could get there, and then and you have to, as an early stage investor, kind of bet on that line,
Yeah.
and when that line connects to the future and along the way, and there will be a lot of returns and a lot of value creation along the way. And then for us,
Yeah.
it's just about dreaming. It's about looking further down and what could be possible technically, and I think fortunately, I'm not in the business of physics or chemistry. I think those industries are it's not within my expertise to imagine like, hey, one day we can float around without gravity in the world. I don't know. Like I have to ask a PhD physicist, but from a technical standpoint, we can see kind of the trend where that's going, and then technology advancements, and I think the black horse is quantum, right? We don't really know what
Yeah.
quantum is going to do, but other than that, like everything else is like, okay, like what's possible today, and with more advancements, what could it be,
Yeah.
10 years from now,
Yeah.
and then backtracking and building that, investing in that.
Yeah. I studied in Switzerland, and Switzerland is cold in winter, and ice hockey was a national sport. And playing ice
Hmm.
hockey, there was one quote from Wayne Gretzky, who was like, the god of ice hockey. And
Right.
he always would say, I don't go after the puck. I anticipate where the puck is going. And so to me, that really
Mm.
stuck in my mind, right? Where is it going to go?
Hmm.
We try to anticipate where it goes. It doesn't always go there. And people on ice skates move
Right.
around all the time really fast, as we all know. But at least you're
Right.
anticipating where it's going to go versus just following it all the time, because you're always going to be behind the puck in that case. So, yeah,
Right.
totally super important, right? How to
Yeah, and I think
anticipate
it's,
and where to go.
totally. I think it's,
Yeah.
as a team, you need some team members that are
Yeah.
behind the puck at all times, right? Like operating.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for myself, I see myself as part of the team when I make an
Yeah.
investment, right? And my role on that hockey team, as using that same example,
Yeah. Yeah.
making investment is like joining a hockey team, right? And my
Yeah.
role and my position in the hockey team is to anticipate, is to be more like Wayne, right?
Yeah.
And then there are others on the team that are perhaps COOs or CTOs, or their work is to make sure that, hey, we have everything buttoned up from the next 3 months or 6 months, and very fortunately, therefore, as an investor, so we get to look far ahead with
Yeah.
having those team members that are taking care of the short term. And then, the CEOs is likely looking, a few years ahead. And as investors, we're basically, our job is to look even further ahead and perhaps, help the CEO to guide them in a certain way that, into the future a little bit more.
Yeah, and like I said, with you, I feel you've been extremely participatory in our evolution in terms of helping us identify where the business models could go, what sort of some of the tokenomics could look like, how the operations and some of the leads as well in terms of business leads, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so to us as a founder, that's like super helpful, right? Because we're worrying about execution, delivery, team cohesiveness, alignment in the direction we want to go, strategy, and then ultimately all the tactics in the middle. And so having somebody that we can really go to that shares the same vision is not to be underestimated for any entrepreneur and startup, right? And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
something you tend to neglect in desperation sometimes. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
with maturity, maybe you learn that.
Yeah,
But
and it's exciting. Yeah, it's just,
yeah,
our job is to find platforms and allies and partners
yeah,
that can
yeah,
help our founders, right?
yeah,
And many different firms do it very differently. Like, and I think you look at Paradigm, maybe they have a huge research team, and you have Delphi that does a lot of tokenomic stuff, and then you got
yeah,
Andreessen Horowitz have a huge,
yeah.
massive team, right?
Team, yeah,
And for us, so when we look ahead and we talk about this stuff and to the 5 year, 10 year future on that theme, we believe that crypto is decentralized and it's global, right? And it's across
exactly.
the board. There's
Totally.
no borders,
Yeah,
right? And that kind of dream or vision of this global, operation requires a lot of partners that are really physically in those parts of the world, and that are having different perspectives and maybe different concerns, different problems with in the case of inflation or regulation,
Yep.
and by having people in those places physically for us is super important. So
Yep.
I will believe that we'll probably have the as one of the larger VCs in the crypto space and to have really strong track record. We're probably the most international than really anyone else, as
Yep.
having offices in Hong Kong, Singapore, Seoul, Shanghai, and covering all major cities in Asia. And then, now, I'm spending a lot of time in Mexico City, and we have a person in Austin, in San Francisco, and, in Miami, New York, and soon LA. So by having those physical presence, that allow us to basically partner with different platforms and different, allies. And then all of a sudden, our founders that are interested in expanding those regions and fulfill their global vision in the next 5, 10 years, which I believe all our founders will be doing in crypto. So we're getting ahead of that by building those, regional partnerships and allies, and connecting founders with big platforms like Binance Labs and Chainlink Labs, and these are huge allies of ours that would dramatically accelerate the fulfillment of their vision. So that's kind of the approach that we've taken, and I hope that that more and more VCs will kind of take that approach instead of the passive approach. And for us, we've taken kind of the lead on this international regional approach
Yeah.
of building that network out for our founders.
Yeah, and I think that's a big transition that crypto and blockchain and Web3 has brought about, right? It's the talent is global, it's
Mm-hmm.
decentralized, and as a result, your presence has to be everywhere in a way in order to adapt and attune to the local cultures, to aggregate the local data. And we're seeing that from a Truflation standpoint. As we go
Totally.
into Mexico, Canada, UK, or Europe, we need to have the same sort of data sources that align with the overall calculations and align the weighting for calculating inflation based on the household expenditures that do differ, right? I mean, the US economy,
Mm-hmm.
70% of the economy is based on consumption. In Europe, it's not that
Mm-hmm.
high, right? I mean, it's more the
Mm.
government plays a big role in the overall GDP in Europe, right? And so how does
Right.
that reflected in the household expenditure, right? And
Mm-hmm.
rent, everybody's a renter in Europe, whereas in the US, it's still a large portion is still house ownership. And so there's all these differences that
Right.
come into how to
Totally.
navigate that and how to have the expertise to help us in those grounds and find the right partners that can bring us the right type of content insights from those markets is really important.
Right. I
Yeah.
think that's super important, and especially in Asia, right? I think obviously mainland China has its own kind of rules
Yeah.
that we all know about, and I think even in Singapore and Hong Kong, and these districts are very special, right? Like
Yeah.
very in comparison to the U.S. cities, and they're like, wow, they're super complicated, and they're
Yeah.
much more tied to governments or
Yeah.
macro
Yeah.
environments, right?
Yeah.
I think in some ways, I think when I look at cities in the U.S., sometimes San Francisco and New York, and yes, macro environments matter, and but it doesn't affect it as much as like say like a one regulation change in say Hong Kong, for example,
Yeah.
or Singapore, or in Asia, it's a big change. I think a lot of things
Yeah.
shift over there, a lot
Shift.
more than the U.S. I think in some ways
Yeah.
the U.S. capital markets or information or technology sector have been much more resilient and stable,
Yeah.
that are independent from maybe from the a lot of the government, at least I like to think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of a huge difference from East and the West. I think
Yeah.
there's a lot more um, state participative ventures and state participated organizations, and even in Japan, right? Some of the top banks
Yeah.
are, you know, 30-50% owned by the government, and
Yeah.
and nobody talks about that, by the way. I think it's funny that like everyone is paying attention to how China is obviously have a lot of state owned, companies and
State-owned
organizations,
enterprises. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and then and I'm Chinese, born in Osaka, and lived in Japan for 8 years, in China for eight, and and when you look at the top companies in Japan and you look at it, hey, these are 30%, 50% state owned companies, and not not that different from China, and probably not that different from Russia, but Japan doesn't get talked about in that way. So it's funny, but it's like that in Asia,
Yeah.
so
I
yeah.
think one of the things that I've spent most of my career in Asia, and what I liked very much is Asia has a lot of traditions, and in a way, the culture
Hmm.
there has always been very conservative, right? However, thanks
Hmm.
to the China, Korea, and Japan, and it's been very quick in adopting crypto as an
Hmm.
alternative currency, and maybe also because of the nature of money goes up, and there are no
Hmm.
institutions there really to provide you a pension per se. It's very
Hmm.
merit oriented, right? And stuff, and sort of there's no, yeah. So how do you see that? Why do you think Asia was much quicker in adopting crypto? And even today, if you look at the big players in the market, all came out of Asia, right? I mean, even
Hmm.
FTX started off in Hong Kong, right? BitMEX launched in Hong
Yeah.
Kong, and they all sort
Yeah.
of started. Coin was in Singapore, then became Liquid in
Hmm.
Tokyo, and so it's like a lot of
Yeah.
this innovation came, Luna, UST out of Korea. So you've got all these different, Bitmain out of China. You were talking about them earlier. So a lot of innovation
Yeah.
actually came out of Asia, right? So it's like interesting to see
Yeah.
um, that adoption, and now it's sort of also incorporating the rest of the world as they come into it, right? So like, yeah, so it's
Hmm.
interesting um, how that happens.
I
Um,
completely
yeah,
agree. I think in some ways, I think um, just like how China kind of leapfrogged the credit cards, right?
yeah,
And then they went straight to digital payments using a mobile
yeah,
application, using
yeah,
Alipay and WeChat Pay. And Japan actually um, went right past, I think, some of the AIM or instant messaging on web, and
yeah.
went straight to mobile messaging
Mobile.
of Line, right?
Yeah,
And then that was a Korean company, but they the adoption of of young people using the internet in Japan to have a social media communicating, it wasn't nearly as high as I think the U.S. and even like the search of like it's crazy. They still use Yahoo search in Japan,
yeah,
right? Which is
uh,
unbelievable.
uh,
They still use Yahoo search today, and it's like that is still the dominant search engine in Japan. And then when you look at those things and you realize that certain things they decided not to adopt as a society or as a country, and
yeah,
then and they just leapfrogged it. Then instead they're like, okay, well, we're not gonna do this, the web like kind of social media thing. I mean, now they're using a little bit more, maybe Twitter or Facebook or whichever platform, but they kind of went straight to instant messaging on mobile.
yeah,
So and in many
yeah,
ways, like instead of younger people, right? Like instead of looking at maybe traditional stocks and equity and capital markets in Japan, and hasn't done that well, right? In the stock
yeah,
markets, and in China, the stock markets are tricky, right? And
yeah,
they don't have a lot of access to the Western markets, and they probably don't have like equivalent of coverage like Robinhood, where where
yeah,
younger people are excited to kind of trade stocks, and and when they have this cryptocurrency that came to life, and speak to them in a way that they can understand, in the younger generations, they just completely bypass the kind of traditional finance and engagement in traditional finance, and buying, I don't know, real estate trusts or whatever. They went straight into, okay, this is the new money, and that is, that we can own ourselves, and we understand technology, and we know more than the people who are kind of more conservative, and I feel that, and obviously regulation has been changing over the last few
Yep.
years, right? In the last short few years, Japan has changed its stance a number of ways, and China obviously has changed its stance, many different ways.
Yep.
And at this, even with those changes, I think the younger generation have realized that they're taking some of these initiatives into their own hands, and they're saying like, hey, we can decide, we can access these things
Exactly.
just with the internet,
Yep.
and they didn't have to get a brokerage account and then get all sorts of this wall garden, right, to be able to access, like in
Yep.
Asia, like in the US already there's a ton of, like, you try to set up a Fidelity account, and or one of these brokerage accounts, it's like a 16-year-old. It's just
Yeah.
like what do I do, right? Yeah, and then the crypto comes in, and you just like, oh, you just take a photo and verify, you as a person, and then you're not a hacker, and then you're all of a sudden you're in. You can buy Bitcoin with bank account or whatever allowance account that you have. As doesn't really matter how old you are. So
Yeah.
so I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I think the two things, right? One is, sort of mobile has been really a driver for providing
Hmm.
personalized internet access. And I think that has enabled so many new features and services, right? And then crypto has provided youth and a way to participate in
Hmm.
a new world and new paradigms that currently the incumbents and the current regulators are just outdated, right? I mean, they're not in
Yeah.
touch with all these capabilities anymore. And as a result,
Hmm.
they still are used to the fidelity and the 50 pages. You're only allowed to set up a bank account when you're 18 years old. You're not allowed to stock trade
Yeah.
until, so all of these limitations that have
Hmm.
incapacitated or had not allowed anybody to participate in a lot of the opportunity and the wealth that's created. Buying a house is too
Hmm.
expensive now, right? You can't afford it. You won't get a mortgage because you don't have a
Right.
track record. You don't have a credit history yet. And it's like, oh, and then, oh, maybe you're even burdened with, student loans and stuff like that. And
Right.
how do you get up to
Totally.
speed fast enough, right? And crypto has
Hmm.
been, and Web3 has been an enablement for everybody to be able to participate and join and engage. But
Yep.
there's also, I think, an element of, in a way, because of the age gap between the
Hmm.
existing regulators and their ties to the existing infrastructure and processes and legacy systems. Um, it's sort of led to a sort of, I call it a bit of a mistrust in the
Hmm.
existing institutions, or a lack of insight or transparency that they'd be looking for traditionally, which they get everywhere else, where I'm totally open, I'm constantly tweeting about myself, sharing everything. And sort of that's sort of how we launched Truflation, to provide an
Hmm.
alternative. Not to say you're
Right.
bad, this is the way you calculate it, but we just want to show a developer approach to that. And
Right.
yeah, where can we take this, right?
Right. And I
Yeah.
think it's the, and your experience with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
And the world of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
how we enter this world of crypto. I think from my personal perspective, what the true innovation of Bitcoin is the alignment of incentives,
Yeah.
across all parties within the network, right? Um, and for the first time, I think in the world, we realize that if you have aligned incentives, in just about anything, you know, um, it's a way to get rid of bad actors. It's a way to have you don't even need a rule anymore because everyone's incentivized to do the same thing,
Exactly.
and it makes everything easier.
Yeah.
And but when you don't have that alignment, is when things get tricky. And most of the world, from the beginning of time, we've never really had alignment of
And
incentives between
exactly.
the customers, users, the builders, the creators, and the engineers, and And that's just how the world is today,
Yeah.
and the world, it has realized that this incentive mechanism is super powerful. It's powerful enough that the Bitcoin hasn't been broken since 2008, right?
Yeah.
And for the
Yeah.
last 14 years. And
Yeah.
how do we create the incentive structure for other things? Then it can align incentives together. And I think in the conversation of inflation numbers, right, or any government numbers, when you look at the incentives for them to publish a number that will look bad for them, and there's none.
It's
There's no incentive,
there's no
right?
incentive. Why would they do
There's,
that, right?
why, like I would lose my job, like I would lose votes, like everything looks terrible, like I'm not gonna get elected, and then I look terrible in history. Why would I ever do that,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And when you look at that and you say, okay, well, there's no incentive for you to publish, like even honest numbers that are truthful, then that gets really fishy.
Yeah.
And on the other side, you have all the incentives to publish numbers that look great,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, the decision is very obvious what you would do as a normal human being, right? It's like you have you're human, you need to eat, and
Yeah.
on one side there's food, and the other side I'll go hungry. You're going to go to the food. It's just
Yeah.
it's incentives,
It's
right? It's just such a simple incentives, right? So I think that's something that we're starting to wake up, and I think with inflation numbers or any data that's published by a party that has no incentive to be truthful, to be objective, to publish
objective.
both the good and the bad. I think that having a decentralized way of doing it, having a very objective, truly independent way of supplying that data, supplying that service, um, and have a full aligned incentives for everyone that's contributing the data, that's publishing the data, that is educating or spreading that data. Everyone has that incentive to do better, right? And I think honesty is the best policy. But to get to that honesty, we have to structure it in a way that everyone wants that honesty and get rewarded by it. And I think
Yeah.
that's what Bitcoin has done. And I think when we had a conversation about how do we do that for inflation numbers,
Yeah.
and how's that experiment work? And I thought it was brilliant when we can align all the incentives of people that want to see and that want to have access and distribute a data, and the power of having that data, and that information to help others to be able to build products with honesty, right, around the world. And I think that's super powerful for Truflation, or really anything that's decentralized, and aligning incentives, that they're supplying data that's meaningful.
And I think that's what people tend to like around what we're doing at Truflation, the fact that they can have it off chain if they wanted to, but all the data has been
Mm,
verified on chain and can be checked and verified again on chain, right? And that's what they like. Ultimately, we believe that more and more smart contracts, as governance shifts on chain, all of these smart contracts are going to require a truth source of truth, right? An oracle. Where do they get that from?
hmm
And what's the transparency associated with that? How do I plug that in
hmm
quickly without having to redevelop it? And so that's sort of the market that we've been going on. And the brilliance with the partnership with Chainlink, at least, has been the multi-chain element, right? And I'm a
hmm
big believer that it's going to be a multi-chain world, because I don't think end users of a service or a DApp are going to be, they don't really care what chain it works on. I want fast finality, I want cheap
Right.
transaction costs, and I want a great user
hmm
experience, right? That's an intuitive user experience. And so that's what we need to be
hmm
building in order to be successful. Yeah.
And we see the same way.
Uh,
Yeah, absolutely the
Yeah.
same way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of, yeah, I think the tribalism within our industry, right? And I understand that. And I understand all their perspectives, but when it comes to a platform that allows people to build just about anything and be the source of truth, right? And
Yeah.
um, it's just there's going to be multiple platforms that will be basically trying to build a source of truth, and people um, can choose, with their own will
Yeah.
and what they want to believe in, and and frankly, we have a lot of talent that have come into the space and
Yeah.
have can build multiple of
Yeah.
these chains and platforms. So there's no reason why like one would take all of it. I
Yeah.
think there's going to be, certain aspects will be meaningful for one industry or one area than the other.
Yeah.
And the best part of all of this is it's all open source, right?
Yeah.
So like,
Exactly.
and we can check, we can verify,
Yeah.
ourselves. So I think that's the most important part, because when you have, platforms that are centralized and it just like we talk about, it's a misaligned
Yeah.
incentives, right? And then when I look back at my career, like the beginning of my career, I started in investment management at Liberty Mutual Asset Management, and I was a intern at the time, and scanning and getting into the Bloomberg terminal and looking at all the data, and you kind of just fully trusting that like whatever is on that terminal in Bloomberg is the source of truth, right? Like you're like, okay, this information is correct because Bloomberg says so, because we pay a lot of money to Bloomberg,
Yeah. Exactly.
and and have this terminal. Like I have this little like YubiKey keychain and with my fingerprint and everything, and so they must be true. They must be aligned in an incentive with us as an investment management firm, asset management firm, to provide the right information. Because if they don't, then we don't pay them money, and then then they don't have a business.
Yeah.
But but it's much more complicated behind the scenes, because if Bloomberg did have some incentive to spread X data, right? Then it shows up on my screen, shows up on everyone's screen, and we kind of just trust that it's the right data. And they also have gotten way too big that like everyone's using Bloomberg, so
I
there is
know.
no other option. So all of a sudden you're like, well, is it like how could we verify that
Yeah.
Bloomberg is giving me the right data on my screen? Or how do we know that like in the order of these articles and information that's provided, the data that's provided to me is I don't know, is personalized or is objective, and there's someone behind it that's manipulating the data that's publishing the data in
Curating.
a
Yeah.
certain way,
Yeah. Yeah.
curating, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
that's it's tricky. And working
Yeah.
at Facebook, um, actually, I saw way ahead of time there was a scandal on Facebook that was basically the top right of web, on the Facebook platform. That was the curated news or the breaking news, right?
Yeah.
And that created a huge scandal, because there were contractors that are like basically putting what is a breaking news, what is not. And then when it comes to elections, when it comes to things that you have to be
Uh-huh.
objective, you can't have that. You just can't not have that. And even the news feed, not having a ton of option to choose what you want to see, what you want to read, right? And it's purely curated by algorithm, right? And and those are the things that, like, when you work at a centralized platform that's super powerful, that a lot of people have, basically get thrown information at, from the algorithm by the engineering team, and but there's curation behind that algorithm, right? And so I think in light of the current events of Twitter and Elon Musk, and
Yeah.
I'm hoping that we can have more options. Like we can
Yeah.
have more selections of like, hey, I want to have like what they're more honest about, like what the heck does the algorithm doing in the background,
Do.
right? And what is it
Exactly.
pumping to us? And by having that decentralized is really important, I think.
Yeah, decentralized and open source, like you said right at the beginning, right? When it's
Hmm.
transparent for everybody to have an opinion on, and then it's up to the curators to then optimize the code base, right? And so, based on the sentiment and the user feedback, and if it's an improvement to the code base and it does and fulfill the values that is reflected on that platform or in that network, right? One of the things I like
Hmm.
to use a lot is I use it called talc, right? So it comes from the chip semiconductor development, but it's basically where everything's tightly aligned. So we need to work seamlessly. And in Web3, we're all aligned in I think, providing this new system and what does this new system look like. And we're yet still loosely coupled because we are so many partners in so many jurisdictions, in so many different platforms, with so many different skill sets that we're all working
Hmm.
together in some way on different projects. But so we are loosely coupled because I'm working with that project and it needs to somehow work with this project as well. But we're all aligned in where we want to move this towards. And I think that that phrase talc or TALC really just works well for addressing that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's so much more that we could be covering off, and the world is in an abundance of opportunity, and I really believe we're in, and that's why I'm super excited about what we're doing here, right? There's so much opportunity, and this is the best time to be alive, right? There's no greater
Hmm.
time to pursue opportunities in Web3, and so you're helping us drive this by funding super good entrepreneurs, and maybe you can share one big project that you think of you're
Hmm.
working with right now outside of Truflation, of course,
Yeah, yeah,
that,
yeah.
that,
Of
that
course.
you're excited about, and where you see the opportunities.
Yeah, and I'm drawn to big ideas. I'm drawn to,
Yeah,
big changes that we haven't seen before. Um,
yeah,
and I think, one of the things that we discussed, that I'll share with you a little bit is, we've invested in really early, into a project called Impervious. At the time, they were building, APIs to access the Bitcoin network and Lightning Network, right? And I think there's a few things in play here. I think the Bitcoin network, most of the people in Bitcoin, um, they see it as a store of value. They look at
yeah,
it, they say, hey, you just buy it, you hold on to it, you put it into a very safe, very secure place, never touch it, right? And this is going to be your passed down to your grandson and your generational wealth, right? That's probably how they view it.
yeah,
But in reality, there's a whole lot more, like with what Bitcoin has done, and the layer two is a Lightning network, and there's a lot more building that's going on there on the and the Lightning network, and I think 3-4 years ago, when you look at Lightning Network, and a lot of people were criticizing that, like, it's not growing fast enough, and it's centralized, or you have to run nodes, and that there were not enough nodes, right? But now there's 35,000 nodes, and the nodes are increasing rapidly, and there's big advocates, like Jack Dorsey and the Michael Saylor and everyone that is pushing for this layer two network on Bitcoin, and we're starting to see that we could potentially put a stable coin. I think Lightning Labs just announced that we could potentially put anything that's like government backed tokens on there as well, like dollars or any currencies on there, besides just Bitcoin. And you can put, if you can do that, that means you can put a whole bunch of other things on there.
yeah,
So kind of the future of putting things on Bitcoin using Lightning Network, is the idea of that is super interesting, because you have this super secure network on the bottom, and you have another layer on top of it that can transact really really fast, and then that world of open source, still open source, and be able to um, run on a one of the largest network on Bitcoin, to build products on top of that is super interesting. So Impervious is started with giving APIs to access that network, and then now they're launching a browser in the next couple weeks, and they can have 4K
Super
videos
cool.
on Lightning Network on Bitcoin. Um, so with this kind of Zoom looking um, thing, and it's purely peer to peer without Zoom in the middle, and we can directly have a call from one person to another through the impervious, Lightning Network and on Tor network, and it's purely encrypted. And if you can do that, then you can have messages, send as well. So you have a basically WhatsApp feature,
Yep,
and
yep.
then if you can do that, then you can
Nice.
have a IPFS and storage feature like a Google Doc feature.
Yep.
Then all those things, you know, um, we're looking at a different world of our interactions, our video calls, our information sharing, file sharing, access to information. You can even publish on this, Lightning Network, and that's completely uncensorable. And anyone that's on the Lightning Network or using an impervious browser can access to it. So the firewalls and all these different things, you can bypass it a whole lot easier with this consumer product. So we're kind of dreaming
Interesting.
a little bit about the world where where it's truly peer to peer, and I think a lot of the peer-to-peer centralized applications that we're using, they say it's peer-to-peer, but it's there's somebody in the middle, right? So if we can truly get to the world of like me to you and you to family member, and there's nothing in between, and that's fascinating. And then I think that enables a lot of different things, and a lot of yeah, just unique products and unique ideas to be born. And yeah, the intermediary that we're breaking down and on all aspects, right? And for Truflation, it's the kind of the Bloomberg that's curating,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're right, and then we're decentralizing that. Like instead of their curation, we're gonna have open source data that's out there for people to take and use those data objectively, right? So all those things that whenever we can kind of in a way push out the person in the middle and say, hey, you don't really need to be there anymore because technology has advanced to this point, and that's super exciting. So I think we're super excited about the Lightning Network, the browser that's natively built on Lightning Network that can do so many things that we never even imagined that Bitcoin Network could do. So I think that was kind of an eye-opening moment for me and say, wow, like this huge network, where people thought that we just buy it and hold on to it forever and never touch it again, and now we can have Zoom calls with it, and that was kind of the moment of like,
That's amazing.
this changes a lot of things.
Yeah.
Okay, this is getting really weird.
Yeah.
So and in a good way, right? So yeah, so that's super exciting for me.
Yeah, no, so check it out, Impervious. I mean, one of the things why I got into crypto is the peer-to-peer
Hmm.
transfer of money, right? I mean, I really got excited
Right.
when I could transfer money around the world instantaneously, no
Hmm.
fees on the Bitcoin network, right? And
Hmm.
and so now seeing the fact that now I can interact with each other, we can have social engagement, right? Beyond just moving money around, we can use the blockchain for many, many other purposes, is really
Hmm.
why this is the best time to be alive, and why we no longer need to rely on middlemen that are telling us how to do and what we can do, but we can leverage a network of in a community that are like-minded, share the same visions, and really go after that and interact directly with those participants in that community. So it's great.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Totally.
thank you very
Yeah.
much. Henry, sort of super good, lots of insights, share similar vision, which is really cool to see and experience. And thank you for sharing that with the audience. It's super excited. And yeah,
Yeah. Thank you,
we'll be,
Stefan. Yeah.
thank you, Henry.